is so good and such a delight to be with you on such a day as this, a day of celebration, a day of recommitment. I was saying to a number of you that I have not been in Edmonton since 1972, so this feels like an incredible treat and a privilege. And I understand that you brought in a little warm weather yesterday for a West Coast whim. I feel right at home. And I am honored to be with you as you celebrate this 100th anniversary. Hear these words of the poet E. E. Cummings as an opening prayer. We thank you, God, for most this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees, for a true blue dream of sky, for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. We who have died are alive again today. Today is the sun's birthday. This is the birthday of life and of love and of wings and of the gay, great happening illimitably earth. Oh, how should tasting, touching, seeing, hearing, breathing, any lifted from the know of all nothing, human merely being, doubt, unimaginable you. Now may the ears of our ears awake, and may the eyes of our eyes be opened. Thanks be to God. Amen. I love anniversaries. I love birthdays, particularly any that end in a significant 0. I mean, they can be a little scary, but they're always a cause for a party and bringing family and friends around. And when you get to the point where you can put 2 zeros behind a number, you really have cause for celebration. I admire you and must assume you're grateful for an anniversary that occurs in the month of January. It always carries that sense still of the energy of the new year. Could have been a little earlier, because New Year's resolutions are already flat and disappearing and probably broken. But there's still that sense of moving into the new. And you're in a month that is named, of course, after the Roman god Janus. Janus of the 2 faces. One face looking to the past, and the other face looking into the future, which is exactly what an anniversary is all about. An opportunity to celebrate this day as, well, a hinge moment, when you are free to look at the past and simultaneously turn and embrace and anticipate a future. Maybe even another 100-year future, God willing, and the creek don't rise and you don't get another Alberta flood. I mean, who knows how these things will go. It is an opportunity for every anniversary celebration to take a look at your history, which is a very biblical thing to do. You walk through the Old Testament, and every 20 pages or so, it's almost like you take some time out. It's an intermission. New things are happening, but somebody, a priest, a prophet, a psalm writer, they get up and say, before we do anything else, we need to remember the amazing things that God has done. You gotta tell the kids, tell each other. You've gotta tell the stories, which is half of our task this day. For when you tell the stories, you get a sense of who you have been, a sense of your identity, and you can affirm it and recognize it and allow it then to be a source of strength that moves you into the other face and into the future. Not only as a time of identity, but a time of giving thanks, recognizing that whatever has happened this past 100 years is not just your doing or your ancestors. It has something to do with the power that flows in and through all these actions, the power of God, who is creator and redeemer and spiritual presence. So it is an opportunity, not just to remember, but to give thanks. I remember a line from the American writer come poet Robert Bly, who says, "The more things for which you can give thanks, the stronger you will be." So as you look to your past, you remember, you look at the identity, and you give thanks for everything. Now, I don't know, I glanced at your history, which is a list of wonderful things. And I think you're probably like any other church, there's the dark side that you just don't talk about. And I'm not asking, I don't want to know too much information. But I want you to have the capacity to look at all of it and give thanks, because that will make you stronger as you move into whatever future God is calling you into. I had a friend who said, a good definition of faith is to, in fact, remember the past and all that God has done, and trust that God will do it in the future, though at the present moment you're totally unclear what God seems to be doing. In fact, not much, if you didn't really look carefully. So you remember the past to be able to have strength for the future. I think it's Mark Twain who said, history does not repeat, but history rhymes. Do you like that? When you tell the stories, strengthening, identity, giving thanks, full of hope, it allows you to look at patterns that will emerge that rhyme a little. So, I know we're celebrating 100 years, 1914, but your history actually began a few years before that. 07 with the founding of Wesley Methodist, 09 with Robertson Presbyterian. You look at that history and you allow the rhyme to occur, saying, what was their strength, capacity, and vision to do the crazy thing of building a church in the wilds of Fort Edmonton? And what can we learn about trying to do something similar in the wilds of 21st century, almost totally secular, spiritual, not religious, collapse of mainline denominations and Christianity? In our times, you get a little bit of strength. Or you say to yourself, Cornerstone, 1913, and you say, Christ is laid, the firm foundation, and the cornerstone of it all. And you say, okay, they did it, we can do it. Or you build a magnificent church with God knows, a 30-meter spire. You've talked to some of the young adults who were responsible for building your anniversary cake, a replica of the church. Easy to build the building, oh, the spire. Actually, I don't think you'll want to eat it. I was told it was mainly Rice Krispies. It was a real challenge. It would be more like the sand, and you get a good shake and the Rice Krispies collapse. But it looks magnificent. And I was told that it was, in fact, the symbol of trying to proclaim to a community that God is with us and present. Except nowadays, you can hardly see the spire because we moved into high-rise times. And it's almost invisible. So you ask yourself in the future, what will be the way that we can speak of the presence of the holy in the midst of a workaday community that is so hungry for that voice? History does not repeat, but it rhymes. You can ask yourself as you look back at a history that survived wars and depression and was present with hope and compassion, what would that look like now? As we teeter on, off and on economic recessions in a world that seems, well, that it's run into its own conclusion with ecological disasters and wars that just never seem to end. Where do we offer a word of hope? Or you might get lost wandering from sanctuary into the memorial hall. I got lost once trying to find the men's washroom. You go up here, around that. I mean, some people in 1950 seemed to be so full of hope and vision that you needed to build extra space because this was a faith community that embraced children and community. community and families and education. Now, if your church is like any of the ones I've served, there aren't as many children as there were in the 60s. I mean, I served a church where people say, oh, in the good old days, there were 1,000 kids from Sunday school. You should have been here. And I'm saying, well, I wasn't. And there are only 20 right now. Hallelujah, let's rejoice. How do you hold the vision of having created space now? What would it look like? Or you go back and celebrate 1971, Wesley United Church, community change, context transformed, shrinking numbers, declining finances. Sound familiar? Well, you've already been there and done that, and experienced the power of joining with a neighbor and augmenting resources. I bumped into, I think it was Margaret May. Margaret, are you here? Wave a hand somewhere. You're up here, okay. And, well, and it wasn't you. Somebody is from Wesley United Church who was on the flower committee? No. Where were you? That's right. 1971, you said, I've been here since 1971, and there are only a handful of us left, and we're still really important, and we remember our history, but we are so committed to Robertson-Wesley, we're celebrating a 100-year anniversary. You did it. And then you took all the money that you got from the sale of the church, and rather than using it to pay the heating bill, which many churches do, let me tell you, you put it into a trust fund to do community outreach and development. Like, what a vision. That's history that you remember, and you rhyme it into the present moment. And you talk to George over there and Lois, who some 18, 20 years ago started up community dinners every month and have been faithfully doing that. And you think, maybe we should do it twice a month. But who knows? You look at your history and you say, how do we rhyme it with God's grace into our future? You talk about this being a community that welcomes, where the spirit is warm and inclusive. And so you say in your present 2009, we will become an affirming congregation. So people, old and young, of all colors, ethnicities, and races, and of all orientations, and all sizes, ages, classes, and wealth, they will belong. Or you look at an incredible history of music. I've never seen so many bells. I can hardly wait to hear them, and I think whoever will be playing these ones must have done a few gym workouts earlier in the day. I'm going to watch it. There's going to be muscle work here. And the kind of choir and the music. And so you say, this is our history. And then I read in your material, you have the Morphosis Choir. A choir for people who are not always welcomed in the professional, auditioned, special choir. People with disabilities who love to sing, and there's space for them. Or you have a history of being engaged in music and the arts. Just look at the stained glass windows here, and you say, well, we'll do a spiritual arts collective, and it'll be so exciting and innovative that even Yale University says, come along and teach us something. And I want to say, those Americans, every now and then they're smart. They know that good things can happen. What you're doing is living out the drama that we saw here of saying, we build on a foundation. And this is the time to remember the story, to celebrate, give thanks, and then find the rhyming strength that moves us into the future. The danger is, and I'm not saying it's happening here, but I've certainly seen it in other congregations, you get so enamored with telling your story and remembering the things of old that you forget that things are actually changing all around you. There's a wonderful line in 43rd chapter of Isaiah where the prophet speaks for God and says, I did wonderful things, I rescued from the Egyptians, remember the rider, the chariot, the sea. And you're thinking, yes, 100 years of good history. And then line 17 says, oh, and by the way, do not remember the former things of old. Just forget them. And you think, well, whoever said the Bible wasn't funny hasn't actually read some of the details on the fine print. Remember, don't remember, meaning don't get stuck in the old. Because the next line says, behold, I am doing a new thing. And part of the challenge of an anniversary Sunday is to say, what's this new thing that God is doing? And how in heaven's name are we to discern, discover, and act upon it? Foundation, it's good. It's when you hold onto the pulpit and you raise your voice and talk about foundations. Or you drift away from the poet and you offer a poem by William Stafford called The Way It Is. And he writes, there is a thread you follow. It goes through things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You try to explain about the thread, but it is hard for them to see. As long as you hold on to the thread, you will not be lost. Oh, tragedies will happen. People will get hurt or die. And you will suffer and grow old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding, but you never let go of the thread. Friends, our thread is Jesus Christ. That almost sounds evangelical, but it's our thread. This is our treasure in an earthen vessel. Beautiful as this sanctuary is, 100 years old, first worship 100 years and 1 day ago, it's still an earthen vessel, a beautiful one. But it could fall apart, God forbid. But the treasure would still be there. The foundation would still be there, and you'd build again. The thread remains, and you follow it with faith and with hope. One of the things that I've discovered is that a way of entering into the future and trying to discover what this new thing is that God is doing is to be open to the power of question. So often I've found people that have a propensity to take the Bible and tell you the answers. It's in the book. I'd rather take the Bible and say, there's a thread, and there are questions. Just for instance, did you know that if you went to the opening chapters of Genesis, you get foundational, creation, humanity, the Garden of Eden, and then you get the Adam and Eve apple eating thing. All seems to fall apart. It feels very parental. If I were God, I'd have gone in and just given them what for. You know, it's like, time out. That would be the best thing I could say. Adam and Eve do their thing, and then they go hiding off in the garden. And instead of the almighty scold and condemnation, the very first thing that God says, where are you? Where are you? Next chapter, the two kids, Cain and Abel, they're going at it. Sibling rivalry. I have a younger brother. He tells me at one point that I took him by the feet and banged him on the floor with his head, and that's why he's got white on the crown of his head. Not true, I'm sure. I'm such a nice guy. Cain murdered Abel. Sometimes you get carried away. But God enters the picture and says to Cain, where is your brother? Almost the first things that God says to us are, where are you? Where is your brother, your sister, your neighbor? You could write a whole Bible wrestling with those two questions. I would say to you, as you enter into your future, so where are you? And where is your brother, your sister, your neighbor? You turn to the New Testament if you want to do a Jesus thing. You turn to the Gospel of St. John. The very first thing that Jesus says in that Gospel is, what are you looking for? Now there's a $20 question. It's a good evangelical question if you find yourself at Tim Hortons or in a pub. You don't want to say, Jesus is the thread. They would just go, oh my Lord, they're hitting on me. But you could say, well, what are you looking for? And that leads into all kinds of conversations. Jesus at other places in the Gospel says, what do you want me to do for you? Do you want to see? He says, what does it profit a person? What does it profit a church? If you feel like you've got the whole world, but you lose your life, yourself, your thread, your foundation, the treasure. They're good questions. And it turns out that there are church consultants who've learned a few things from the Bible. And when they come to churches, they raise questions as well. Alice Mann wrote a wonderful book on how to revive congregations. She comes from the Alvin Institute. She said, really, a congregation only has to wrestle with 3 questions. Who are you? What is God calling you to do? Who's your neighbor? So it's your identity and the call of God and your neighbor. And when you sit with those questions, who knows what this is going to look like? And I can see the God Janice saying, you've done a good job on your history and you're remembering. Now, we are getting into the really exciting times. Behold, I'm doing a new thing. And that is the promise. That is the challenge. I have a friend, church consultant Chris Corrigan, goes all across the country, down in the States as well, works with churches and with business, trying to help them look at possibilities in the future. He raised a question for the United Church, which is his passion and love. And he said, I'm inviting you to be a heretic of hope. And so I would like to invite you, the people of Robertson-Wesley, to be heretics of hope. And he said, well, what does that actually mean in these tough 21st century times? He said, if everything that you knew about church crumbled, and you still wanted to get together, still needed to get together with fellow Christians or seekers or people who are hungry for connection with holy. If you say to yourself, this surface, beautiful as it is, lacks depth, if that's what draws you, you are a heretic of hope because you are asking the why of church, not the how. The how changes depending on time and place and numbers and money. The why of church is what holds you and inspires you. One final image. I had originally thought as I was preparing for this service that we would be following the lectionary. I nearly always try to stick to the lectionary because it helps me as traveling moderator avoid having a stump sermon that I whip out of my back pocket and just repeat endlessly. The lectionary forces you to do something different and contextual and original. Then I was told after I was halfway through my prep, we're not using the lectionary, so talk about foundations. And I thought, okay, but I just had to throw it in at the very end. Why waste a little bit of prep? You know, the passage, 4th chapter of Matthew, is the call of the disciples. It nearly always comes up near the end of January. Jesus charges off, grabs a few fishermen. I actually saw a title in a neighboring church called the Flash Mob Church. It's like Jesus saying, come on now. You can see him almost tweeting, doing a quick text, like, come here. But what I want to say to you is that the thread you are following and holding on to, it is actually the Jesus thread. The Jesus thread. We are called to follow Jesus. That can mean going in a multitude of directions. Don't let anybody tell you there's only one right way. It's haven't asked questions. But we're about following. this teacher, this healer, this embodiment, revelatory moment of God's love and grace and justice dream, the man who said the kingdom of peace and righteousness and justice is just exploding in if you will just see it and just be part of the journey. We're called to follow Jesus. So you turn and celebrate your history with an incredible passion. You learn more about who you've been, where you've done, what you've done. Give thanks, find strength, and then begin to move into your future, building on foundations, letting the history rhyme, and then holding on to the thread that is Jesus. And then you carry in your hearts one final poem. This one is by Dorothy Sola, called Revolutionary Patience, and it's all about Jesus. And she writes, Jesus, he needs you. That's all there is to it. Without you, he goes up in Dachau's smoke, is left hanging, is sugar and spice in the baker's hands, gets revalued at the next stock market crash, is consumed, used up, blown away, without you. Help him. That's what faith is. He couldn't bring it about, his kingdom, couldn't then, couldn't later, can't now, not at least without you. And that is his irresistible appeal. People of Robertson-Wesley, look back, look forward. Hold on to your thread. Follow the one who calls you into the fullness of your life. He needs you. That is an irresistible appeal. Thanks be to God.